Become a part of Oral's drive. It's Oral time, the best time of the day. Listen carefully, what he has to say. It's Oral's
Hello guys, this is Oroth and a warm welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm gonna highlight a super strong challenge dungeon build for necromancers, and the concept of this build is that we will apply tons of dot effects to targets in a huge area, and then we will also use a certain essence to resolve all the remaining dot damage at once continually. So let me show you first which skills I'm using. And I use in the primary slot Soulfire, I use in the first skill slot Grimscythe, in the second skill slot Corpse Lance, in the third skill slot Bone Armor, and in the fourth and final skill slot I use Command Golem. Let us also take a quick look at the set pieces I'm using. I'm using 2 pieces of Baron, and this is because we want to prolong the dot effects as much as possible, and this gives us 30% extra duration. We also use 4 pieces of Angmet because this will prolong some dot effects, all the burn effects that is. We, for example, have Roiling Consequence, so this is of course good, but it also increases the duration of the 4-piece effect from the Angmet. And finally we also use 2 pieces of Vitus Urge, and this is because we want to prolong durations from all the buffs, like for example the Roiling Consequence effect or the Morn Skull effect, etc, etc. And if you have checked some of my previous videos, you will also recognize this setup a little bit, because this build reminds us a lot about one of my favorite Crusader builds. That is also extremely strong, and I would probably say that the Crusader build is maybe even a little bit stronger than this one, but this is very, very close. And let us continue by taking a look at the essences. In the helmet slot I use Studied Menace, and what it does is that whenever I use Corpse Lance it will inflict a dot effect. And as I mentioned, the purpose of this build is to apply as many dot effects as possible, because we're going to resolve all the damage at once continually, and I'm going to show you how we do that very soon. In the chest slot I use Unfilled Grave, and what this does is that it allows our Bone Armor to give us a damage buff, and it also reduces all the damage we take, which is also neat, but it's especially the damage we are looking for. And I also use a Bone Armor essence in the shoulder slot, which is Incision Cusp, and this will increase our critical hit damage by 30.4% at maximum essence mastery. And if we go in here to the skill page, we can see that this Bone Armor damage buff can go up to 38%, which is a very strong damage buff for sure. If we continue and take a look at the pants, this is a very, very important essence for this build, because what it says is that when Grimscythe hits a target, it will now trigger all the remaining dot damage. So what will happen is that I will use Grimscythe, and I use an essence that makes this Grimscythe revolve around me, and whenever it hits an enemy it will deal all the remaining dot damage. So when I have applied a lot of dot effects, as soon as the target gets hit by the Grimscythe it will deal all the remaining dot damage at once. And after that I will be able to reapply some of the dots again if needed. In the first main hand slot I use Defiling Swarm, and this is what makes this Grimscythe orbit around me, like I just showed you. In the first offense slot I use Spite Feeder, and this it makes it so that Soulfire has a chance to inflict a burn effect, and if you remember I also use the Angmet set, so this burn effect will also be prolonged by that. This of course goes very well with this build, because this dot will also be resolved whenever it gets hit by the Grimscythe. In the second main hand slot I use Rotted Harvest, And here one might wonder why I'm not using the poison golem that also adds a dot effect. But the reason for this is that if you see this circle around the golem, this actually applies a loss of control effect. We can also go here and read on the skill page. So if I scroll down here to command golem, we can see that this area of effect will both continually deal damage. This is not a dot effect because it counts as a ground effect. But what it does is that it will always keep pain clasp active immediately when an enemy is standing within this area. And the most important thing is also that it slows nearby enemies. And if you checked the video I released yesterday, I showed you the new enchantment system, because there is a very powerful affix that you can reroll on your magical attributes that increases all the damage you deal to enemies suffering loss of control. So what this golem does is that it actually has a very big area of effect that will slow enemies. It will not slow any boss monsters, but in challenge dungeons it's also very important to kill off packs of monsters very fast, and this will trigger the affix I just mentioned. And as I explained yesterday, we can actually get 10% damage done to enemies suffering loss of control on both the main hands and both the off hands. We can also get this on the gloves, and this will be a huge damage boost. And I also use the Reforgers that will increase the damage done to enemies suffering loss of control. So yeah, here you also see the Reforge setup. I use 3 from the Vengeance family to get this 100% family buff every 9 seconds. And I also have a lot of duration of beneficial effects and extra critical hit damage. And finally, in the second offhand, I use Departed Appetite, and this makes it so that Corpse Lance consumes corpses around me to create a vortex with bone spikes that orbits around me, and these bone spikes will continuously reapply the dot from the helmet here, Studied Menace. I did try out to use a helmet that adds an armor break from Grimscath instead, but after some testing I made a conclusion that this helmet performs the best. So this is a very great build because it synergizes extremely well all the SSS with each other, and also with the set pieces, and also with the legendary gems that we will take a look at now. So first of all, in the helmet slot I use Misery Elixir, and the reason for this is because I want to prolong the durations of all the dots as much as possible. And this means that when there is a longer duration, there is more ticks of damage that will occur, and then there will be more ticks of damage that gets resolved at once whenever a target gets hit by Grimscath. I also use Bottled Hope. This is also to give me some extra movement speed and of course some extra damage. The downside of this build is that we have quite low mobility. It's possible to switch out the golem for wraith form if you are in a very high damage dealing party, but in challenge dungeons, as I said, mobility is not as important anymore, so it's a little bit better to use high damage output. I also use Blood-Soaked Jade for some extra damage and movement speed. I also use Mornskull, and at first when Mornskull released I was a little bit skeptical because it doesn't have 100% uptime like a lot of other legendary gems. But what's so good about Mornskull is that when it's active it will most often provide you more damage increase compared to a lot of other gems. And what's also important is that this gem will activate the same time as some of your other important gems that has the same cooldown of 20 seconds. And the efficiency of a damage buff from a specific legendary gem will be a lot higher if it's happening at the same time as other important buffs, because damage in Diablo Immortal is exponential, and I have explained this in great depth in many of my videos. If you want to know more about the damage formula, I recommend you to watch part 1 of my free-to-play series. It explains you exactly how the damage formula works, and it's not only for free-to-play, it's for all players. It's very useful information in that video. But as I mentioned, Roiling Consequence is a perfect example why Månskull is great, because this also has a 20-second cooldown and it will increase the critical hit chance. Plus it will also apply burn effects that counts as a dot, so synergizes very well with the pants and the main hand with the Grimscythe. And I use Pain Clasp for extra damage output, Seeping Bile for an extra dot, and Viper's Bite for an extra dot. And these two gems here, Seeping Bile and Viper's Bite, they're very important for this build, because what we want to do here is that we want to increase our burst damage as much as possible. And if we're able to increase it enough, we can most often kill off packs almost instantly. And then it's not really as important to have sustained damage output. So if you are able to dish out as much burst as possible, you will be able to clear all the packs in dungeons and progress through the dungeon a lot faster. This will decrease our single target DPS a little bit, but it's still a plus in most cases. So a very, very strong build, and you will see it in action very soon, because you will probably deal more damage than most people if you use this build. And it's important here that you look at all of the details. You can't just copy the essences, you also need to have the correct set items, and it's better to have lower ranked gems compared to the wrong gems. So if you can have a Viper's Bite at rank 5, that's superb, and if you don't have Seeping Bile, you can replace it with Everlasting Torment, for example. It's a very good option. And I can also mention that in normal dungeons, Seeping Bile is not very useful, because all the monsters, they die in one hit most of the time. But in challenge dungeons, the Seeping Bile will trigger more consistently, and it makes it a very viable choice, because whenever a monster with Seeping Bile dies, it will spread to other monsters nearby. I can also show you the Paragon I'm using. I've been playing around with a few different versions. I'm currently using Vanquisher because it feels like it increases the damage the most. It's possible that I could also utilize Slinger, but the problem with Slinger is that these old Weaver effects at the top here, they take a little bit too long to activate, and I also feel that it takes a little bit too much time to fully get the full benefit from the options here at the lower left. I could also use Slayer, it's also a great option, but the problem with Slayer is that it will spread dots to other targets, but these dots will deal a lot of reduced damage. And here I don't have an issue spreading dots to all of the targets, and I don't want the lesser versions of Seeping Bile or Viper's Bite to spread to monsters. I want the original effect to spread instead. So that's why I'm not using Slayer. But I do use the Death's Release just for a small little extra damage increase, but this is not important, of course. So let us dive into a dungeon and see how the build performs, and I think you're going to be very amazed, and please let me know later on in the comments how it works for you, or if you have any questions. And of course, please subscribe to my channel if you like this type of content. Let's now dive into the dungeons, and I'm going to explain to you how to play this build in the most efficient way. So here we find ourselves in a challenge dungeon. I chose to highlight this build in Tristram Cathedral because I think it really shines in huge areas. And what's also important to mention here regarding the Golem is that not only does it have a huge area of effect that will trigger dots and the damage done to enemies suffering loss of control effects, but whenever you jump with the Golem ahead, you also make sure that you reach the mobs before others do. And what's also good about this jump is it will taunt all the enemies. So all of the enemies within the area of effect will start attacking the Golem, and then they will gather in a small spot so that you can hit all of the mobs with your Grimscythe. So that's also a neat little extra addition to the Golem here that works very well in some dungeons. And you can see already that the damage is crazy with this build. And one of the reasons why it's so crazy is just thanks to these enchantments I've been mentioning, that I've been able to increase my damage done to enemies suffering loss of control. So everything within this area of effect of the golem that is not a boss will trigger this effects. And yeah, that's why you also can see these huge damage numbers. You can see tons of crits above millions, as high as 5-6 million sometimes when the Vengeance family activates. It's also important to mention here that we have opted for more burst thanks to Seeping Bile and Viper's Bite. This will decrease the damage output against the bosses a little bit, but for most part I prefer this setup compared to a higher sustained DPS version, where I maybe replace a few legendary gems. But just keep that in mind. Sometimes it can be trouble because some bosses, when I use the full sustained damage version, I'm able to skip a lot of phases and that will save me time, but overall I prefer this one. As I've also mentioned earlier, the only downside with this build is that we have a little bit less mobility. You could switch out the golem to gain more mobility by using Wraith form. But in my opinion, I think that in most parties, mobility is not as important anymore as it used to be in challenge dungeons, because we are spending more time fighting and less time running. So in most cases I prefer this setup, but if I'm with a very strong party, then I might pivot a little bit more to mobility. But yeah, it's optional. You can try both and see what you like the most. So yeah, we are almost dishing out 2 billion damage in this dungeon, and that's really good. If I compare this with my top Crusader build, I have to say that this deals almost as much damage. The downside with this build is that it has less mobility than the Crusader, but the area of effect that spreads dots and also this damage done to enemies suffering loss of control effects is bigger with the Golem compared to the Crusader version. So with all of this being said, I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope that you have fun if you try this build out. And as I said earlier, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, or if you just want to spread some love. And before we say goodbye, I want to wish you a very nice day or a very nice evening wherever you are. And to all of my clan members in Nyx, I would of course also like to say Voruk Nyx, Sholak Sol. So bye bye!